Single dad was cleaning floors until the new CEO walked in and recognized him. They smirked when James Calloway showed up to the executive floor with a mop cart on Monday morning. Bridget Moss whispered to her colleague Neil Farr right there in the open office, "Who reassigned the janitorial to the C-suite? HR is going to love this." The 42nd floor of Vantage Capital Partners looked the way money looks when it stops trying to impress anyone. Slate floors, floor-to-ceiling glass, a reception desk carved from a single slab of white oak. Bridget Moss stood near the conference room entrance in her $400 Theory blazer, coffee in hand, watching James wheel his cart off the elevator with the relaxed observation of someone watching something beneath her. Neil Farr, Senior Director of Portfolio Management, leaned against the doorframe and smiled. Three analysts at their desks looked up, looked at each other, and looked back down. James moved the cart into position near the south corridor window. He put in his earbuds. He began mopping. Bridget said something else. Neil laughed quietly. What Bridget didn't know was that the man she was watching had, 3 years ago, built and sold a $60 million logistics company, and that the acquiring firm was Vantage Capital Partners. What none of them knew was that the new CEO arriving that morning, their new CEO, the one whose appointment had been announced in a company-wide email 6 days ago, had been James Calloway's college roommate for 4 years, had stood next to him at his wedding, had called him 2 weeks ago on a Sunday afternoon to say, "I know what happened. I know where you are. And I need to tell you something." By end of business that day, Neil Farr would be beginning a disciplinary review. Bridget Moss would be on a performance improvement plan. And James Calloway would be sitting in a corner office, not as maintenance staff, but as something Vantage Capital Partners didn't even have a title for yet. Because they'd never hired someone like him before. But first, he had to finish the South Corridor. And he had about 40 minutes before everything in his life changed again. 7 hours earlier, James Calloway had woken at 5:30 to an alarm he didn't need anymore. He'd been a light sleeper since Sophie was born. 8 years of waking at any sound, a cough, a bad dream, the particular silence that meant she'd climbed out of bed and was doing something in the kitchen. The alarm was a habit he kept because the alternative was lying awake, waiting for it. He dressed in the dark. Work clothes, dark pants, the gray Henley, the worn jacket he'd had since before Vantage. He'd learned, doing this job, that you didn't wear anything you couldn't kneel on a floor in. He had learned a lot of things doing this job. Sophie was still asleep when he checked on her. She slept the way she did everything, completely, with total commitment. Arm thrown over the edge of the mattress, hair everywhere. He adjusted the blanket. She didn't stir. The kitchen counter had his coffee already set up from the night before, the pot on a timer. He poured it, stood at the window. The city below was doing its 5:30 thing, delivery trucks, a few joggers, the first lights coming on in office buildings downtown. He thought about Marcus's call. Marcus Webb had been his roommate at Northwestern. 2 years ahead of him in school, 3 years ahead of him in every other way, faster, sharper, the kind of person who made rooms run better just by being in them. They'd stayed close after graduation, through James's startup years, through Marcus's climb up 3 different firms. Marcus had been at James's wedding. Marcus had been the second call James made, after his attorney, when Vantage Capital acquired Calloway Logistics and the transition went wrong. The acquisition had been fair on paper. The price was right. The terms were clear. What James hadn't anticipated, what his attorney had later told him he should have built protections against, was what happened after. The Vantage integration team had moved fast, restructured faster, and the people James had spent 4 years building his company around were gone within 8 months. his operations director, his head of logistics technology, his 3 best regional managers. All displaced, all quietly, all with settlement packages that made litigation expensive. James had fought it the only way he could for 14 months. Then he'd run out of runway. He was not a man who felt sorry for himself. He had noted what had happened, filed it, and moved on to the immediate problem. Sophie was 6. He was a single father with a depleted savings account and legal fees that had eroded the acquisition payout faster than he'd planned. And he needed work that let him be home by 3:30 when she got off the bus. He'd found it. Commercial cleaning. Night shifts when Sophie was with his mother. Morning shifts when school was in session. The pay was modest. The hours were real. Nobody asked him about his background, which was, in the first year, a relief. He thought about Marcus's call differently now than he had the day he received it. 2 weeks ago, he'd heard the words and understood their surface meaning. Standing at the kitchen window this morning, he thought he might understand something deeper. "I need you to trust me," Marcus had said. Just one more day. He poured a second coffee into a travel mug, left a note on the kitchen table for his mother, who would be there by 7. S had trouble sleeping around 3, might be tired. Lunch is in the fridge. Back by 4. J. He drove downtown with the radio off. He was thinking about Sophie, about the lunch in the refrigerator, about whether she'd eat the apple slices or negotiate around them. He was not thinking about what was going to happen on the 42nd floor of Vantage Capital Partners at 9:47 that morning. He parked, badged in through the service entrance, clocked in, got his cart from the supply room and rode the elevator up, the same way he had every Monday for 11 months. The 42nd floor was the executive level. James had been assigned there 4 months ago when a colleague transferred out and a slot opened up. He hadn't asked for the assignment. He hadn't declined it either. He knew the floor, knew the layout better than most of the people who worked there, where the vents ran, which corner window leaked when it rained. The section of baseboard near the senior director's offices that had been repainted over a water stain that was going to come back. He knew which executives arrived early and which arrived late, who left dishes in the common sink and who didn't, whose office was genuinely clean and whose was theater. He knew Bridget Moss, Senior VP of Portfolio Operations. She'd been at Vantage for 6 years, which was long enough to have strong opinions about who belonged in which spaces. She had never spoken to him directly, but he had learned her opinion of him through the things she said to other people in rooms she considered private. She was not quiet when she thought she wasn't being heard. The maintenance staff were, for Bridget Moss, effectively furniture. He knew Neil Farr, Senior Director, Portfolio Management. Neil was the more performative version of the same thing. He liked an audience. He liked a reaction. And he delivered 3 separate comments about James's presence on the floor in the past 4 months, each one slightly louder than the previous. The last one had been overheard by 2 junior analysts who'd had the decency to look uncomfortable. James had noted all of it. He had not done anything about it. He mopped. South corridor first, same as always. Work into the corner, don't cross your own clean section, keep the cart positioned so people could pass. He had developed, over 11 months, a particular kind of discipline about his work. You did it well or you didn't. There was no partial credit in clean floors. His phone was in his pocket, not in his earbuds. He'd put the earbuds in for optics. He was listening to the floor. At 8:22, Bridget walked past with 2 other women and said, without stopping, "Careful, ladies. Wet floor." She did not look at him. At 8:47, Neil Farr appeared with a coffee and stood near the service corridor entrance, watching James work with the expression of someone who had decided to be entertained. "You missed a spot," Neil said. James looked at the floor. There was no missed spot. "By the wall," Neil said. He pointed at a section James had already cleaned. James moved the mop to that section, cleaned it again. Said nothing. Neil watched a moment longer, satisfied, and went back to his office. James wrung out the mop, repositioned the cart, moved to the next section. He had been practicing for 11 months the discipline of not reacting. It was harder than the mopping. He was not by nature a patient person. He had built a company at 31 through a combination of speed and directness that had served him well until it hadn't. He had learned, in the 2 years since, the different kind of strength that patience required. He had not fully mastered it. But he was getting better. At 9:15, his phone buzzed. "Marcus, almost there. Give me 30. He put the phone back in his pocket. At 9:33, Bridget Moss called a spontaneous floor meeting in the open bullpen. James was working the corridor adjacent to it, close enough to hear, not close enough to be addressed. He kept working. "As you all know," Bridget said, in the brisk tone she used when she wanted to seem more senior than the moment required. "The new CEO starts today. I want us to be clear on a few things before he arrives. First, the executive floor should be looking its best." She paused with the timing of someone used to an audience. "Which means if anyone has personal items or, let's say, extraneous equipment in the corridor, let's get that sorted." She did not look at James. The pause did the looking for her. Neil Farr made a sound of agreement. 3 junior analysts exchanged glances. "Second," Bridget continued, "Marcus Webb comes from Meridian Group, and Meridian runs a very particular kind of culture. High performance, low tolerance for dead weight. I think we all know what that means for how we present ourselves today." She looked around the room. Any questions? There were no questions. James moved his cart 6 inches further into the corridor. He was thinking about the phrase dead weight and the particular pleasure Bridget had taken in it. And he was thinking about Sophie's apple slices. And he was thinking about Marcus, who had sat across from him in a dorm room 20 years ago, eating cold pizza and explaining, with the certainty of a 23-year-old who turned out to be right, that the most important thing you could build wasn't a product or a company, but a reputation for being exactly who you said you were. Marcus had been right about that. James had been right about a lot of things too. He'd been wrong about one. He'd assumed that being right was enough. At 9:44, the elevator opened. Marcus Webb walked out of the elevator the way James remembered him walking into every room, not with performance, but with the settled presence of a man who had decided, a long time ago, not to waste energy on entrances. He was in a dark suit, no tie. His assistant followed with a leather portfolio. Behind them, a woman James didn't recognize, probably legal or comms. The floor went slightly still the way floors go still when authority arrives. Bridget Moss materialized near the elevator bank with the practiced speed of someone who had been watching. "Marcus, welcome to Vantage. I'm Bridget Moss, Senior VP of Portfolio Operations. We've been so looking forward to. Thank you," Marcus said. Not dismissive, just complete. He shook her hand, shook 2 others, nodded at someone near the window. And then his eyes moved down the corridor and stopped. James Calloway was standing at the far end of the south hall with a mop cart. He was looking back. Marcus Webb went still. Not the stillness of confusion, the stillness of recognition landing in a room where it wasn't supposed to land yet. Bridget was still talking. Marcus wasn't listening. He said quietly to his assistant, "Give me a minute." And then he walked down the south corridor toward the maintenance cart and the man standing behind it. The floor watched. Bridget Moss stopped mid-sentence. Neil Farr, who had emerged from his office for the arrival, went very still near the doorframe. Marcus reached James, stopped, looked at him for a moment. "You actually did it," Marcus said quietly, not a question. 11 months, James said. Marcus shook his head. "I told you I'd be here before a year." "You were cutting it close." Marcus looked at the mop cart, at James's gray Henley, at the floor, which was clean. He looked back up. Something passed across his face that wasn't quite emotion and wasn't quite its absence, something older than either. "How's Sophie?" he said. "She's good. She ate the apple slices for once." Marcus laughed. A real one, sudden. The kind of laugh that doesn't care who hears it. Behind them, 40 feet away, Bridget Moss was standing with her coffee cup suspended halfway between the counter and her face. Neil Farr had taken a step backward into his own office. 3 junior analysts were looking at each other with wide eyes and the dawning understanding that they had just watched something they were going to be describing for years. Marcus turned slightly, not to address the room, but the room was there, and he knew it. "This," he said loud enough to Carrie, "is James Calloway. He built Calloway Logistics, which Vantage acquired in year 3 of its current fund. That acquisition returned 4.1x to investors." A pause. "He's also the reason I went into private equity. He explained it to me in a dorm room in 1998 using a diagram on a napkin. I still have the napkin." He looked at the cart. "He's been working this floor for 11 months. The floor was silent. Bridget Moss set her coffee cup down with a small, careful click. "James." Marcus looked at him. "I'm going to need an office." "You've got one. Corner, south side. Good light." "I know. I meant for you." James looked at him. "We'll figure out the title later," Marcus said. "I have some ideas. So do you, probably. But first," he gestured at the cart, "can we get someone else to finish the corridor?" James looked at the mop, at the clean floor, at the 42nd floor of Vantage Capital Partners, which was very quiet. "I'm not leaving it half done," James said. Marcus nodded. "No, you wouldn't." He turned to his assistant. 20 minutes, then my office." He walked back down the corridor toward the executive suite. His assistant followed. The woman from legal followed, slightly dazed. James finished the south corridor. He did it the same way he'd done it every Monday for 11 months. Work into the corner. Don't cross your own clean section. The floor around him stayed silent. He could feel eyes, but he was used to that. When he finished, he stood the mop in the cart, removed his earbuds, and walked to the supply closet to return the equipment. On the way, he passed Neil Farr's office. Neil was at his desk. He did not look up. His face had the careful blankness of a man composing himself. He passed Bridget Moss near the conference room. She said his name, Mr. Calloway, with the inflection of someone who had just learned to use it. He nodded, kept walking. Marcus's office had the corner views James had mentioned. The city on 2 sides, the lake visible in the distance on clear days. This was a clear day. James sat across from Marcus at the conference table that had been set up in the space, still half arranged by the moving team. "How bad was it?" Marcus said. "The acquisition aftermath? Or the past year?" "Both." James was quiet for a moment. "The acquisition was fair. The integration wasn't. You know what they did to the team." He looked at the window. "The past year was something else. It was hard and it wasn't hard. Sophie needed me home by 3:30 and I was home by 3:30. That part worked. And the rest? You find out things about yourself when you strip everything down, James said. Some of them are good. Some of them you'd rather not know. Marcus nodded slowly. I heard about the morale situation on this floor. Bridget Moss, Neil Farr. I didn't come here to make a case against specific people. I know. I have the maintenance staff's complaint logs from the last 8 months. I had them pulled before I accepted this role. Marcus looked at him. I'm going to deal with it. Not because of you, because that's not a floor I want to run. James said nothing. What I want, Marcus said, is for you to tell me whether you're willing to stay. In what capacity? Marcus leaned forward. Chief Operating Officer. James looked at him. The firm needs one. Has for 2 years. I've needed someone I trust. You understand this business from the inside out. You built a company. You lived through an acquisition. You've spent 11 months watching how this floor actually operates, which is more useful than any consultants reported I could commission. He paused. I'm also asking because you're the best operator I've ever known, and I've been watching you mop floors for 3 weeks longer than was necessary, because the announcement timing had to be right. You knew I was here for 3 weeks before you called? I knew for 6 months. I needed the CEO role finalized before I moved. James was quiet. He looked at the window, at the lake in the distance, flat and silver. Sophie gets off the bus at 3:30, he said. I know. Your hours are your hours. We'll staff around them. I'm not going to negotiate on that. I know that too. A beat. James, I have a daughter. She's 4. I've made a choice about what her first 10 years look like, and I've built my schedule accordingly. I'm not asking you to be someone different than you are. I'm asking you to be exactly that person in this building. James looked at the table, at the city beyond the window, at the corner office with its good light that had been, for 11 months, something he cleaned and left. He thought about Sophie's note on the whiteboard at home. Daddy's big day today? He told her last night that something might be different tomorrow. She'd received this information with the equanimity of a child who had learned that her father was full of surprises and that most of them were fine. Will you still be home at 3:30? Yes. Then it's fine, she'd said. Different is fine. I want the integration protocols for the Callaway acquisition reviewed, James said. Whatever happened to my team shouldn't happen in future transactions. That's a condition, not a negotiation point. Already on my list. And I want 6 months before any public announcement of the role. I need to rebuild the structure internally before I'm a headline. Agreed. And I finish my shift today. I clocked in. I clock out. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. You're going to clock out of your last janitorial shift and clock into a COO role in the same afternoon? Yes. Marcus shook his head slowly. Then he extended his hand. James shook it. Welcome back, Marcus said. I never fully left, James said. I just changed what I was doing. By Thursday, Bridget Moss had received a formal notice of a performance improvement plan. Not for the comments to James specifically, though those were documented, but for a pattern of conduct across multiple staff complaints spanning 14 months. The review had been initiated by HR on the direction of the new CEO. It was thorough, specific, and gave her 90 days. She did not call anyone to discuss it. She had the sense to know that the room had shifted and that her previous allies in it were recalibrating. By the following Monday, Neil Farr had been called into a meeting with HR and his department head regarding 3 documented incidents involving comments made to contract and maintenance staff. He emerged from the meeting with an improved understanding of his situation. He left the 42nd floor on a lateral transfer request 2 weeks later, citing a desire for a fresh environment. The request was approved. James heard about both from Marcus's chief of staff, who delivered the information as a matter of record, not as a gift to unwrap. James nodded, thanked her, went back to the integration review he was building, which was already 12 pages and not finished. He did not feel satisfaction, exactly. He felt something quieter, the acknowledgement that the building had, eventually, rearranged itself around what was true. He had known what was true for 11 months. It had simply taken the building a little longer to catch up. 6 weeks later, James woke at 5:30. He didn't need the alarm. He kept it anyway. Sophie's bus came at 8:15. He made her breakfast, eggs, toast, the apple slices she was reliably negotiating around now, and sat across from her at the kitchen table while she ate and described a disagreement she'd had with her best friend Cora about whether cats were smarter than dogs. She had strong views on this topic, which she delivered at length. He listened, asked the right questions, learned that the evidence for cat intelligence was more robust than he'd previously understood. She had started telling people her dad had a new job. He was a COO now. She did not know what a COO was, but she'd heard Marcus use the phrase, exactly the right person, when he'd called the house 2 nights ago. And she'd written it on the whiteboard in the kitchen. Dad. Exactly the right person. She'd drawn a small star next to it. He drove her to school, watched her walk in, her backpack too large for her, the same focused walk she'd had since she was old enough to have a walk. He sat in the car for a moment after she disappeared through the doors. He thought about 11 months, about 5:30 alarms and mop carts and supply closets and the 42nd floor and a south corridor he had cleaned. Well, every Monday. And the thing Marcus had said about the napkin from 1998. He thought about Sophie asking, "Will you still be home at 3:30? And the certainty with which he'd said yes. He drove downtown, took the elevator to 42, badged in, different badge now, different color, different access, and walked to the corner office with its good light and its view of the city and the lake silver in the distance. He made coffee, opened the integration review, got to work. At 3:15, he closed his laptop, said goodnight to Marcus's assistant, who had already learned that 3:15 was not negotiable and had stopped being surprised by it. Took the elevator down, drove across the city. He was in front of the school when the bus pulled up. Sophie came off the bus third. She saw him, and her face did the thing it always did. Not a big reaction, just a settling, like something clicking into place. She walked to the car and got in and dropped her backpack on the seat. "How was it?" he asked. "Good." Cora changed her mind about cats. "I didn't even argue. She just figured it out." How'd that feel? Sophie considered this with the measured assessment of someone who thought precision mattered. "Better than arguing," she said. "More satisfying." He put the car in drive. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. Are you happy at the new job?" He thought about the corner office, about Marcus shaking his hand, about the integration review and the 12 pages and the work that was, for the first time in 2 years, genuinely his. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She nodded, looked out the window, accepted this as confirmed. "Good," she said. "You should be." He drove them home through the early afternoon light, the city ordinary around them, everything exactly as it was supposed to be.